Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Yesterday we heard part one of our multi-club ownership series as we learnt about how MCOs work and also their purpose. Today we get some real-world examples hearing from inside the operations whose clubs include sides from the Premier League and Major League Soccer. So what is it like to own and manage multiple clubs in different leagues and sometimes in different sports? We've got Matt Slater with us again today, and also we've got a very special guest, Tim Bezbatchenko, president of Black Knight Football. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And you're actually speaking from Bournemouth's brand new training ground, one of your clubs. This is a monumental moment for the club and also its ambitions moving forward, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. And first off, thanks for having me, guys. We're sitting here taping from the new training ground in Canford Magna, which is just north of Bournemouth Town Centre. It is a brand new training facility. The staff is moving in this week. The coaches will arrive today, and then the players will start training tomorrow. And I think we can say it's all surreal because it's been a long time coming for this club. I believe they started the plans for this back in at least 2017. And it's been an emotional week for a lot of the staff as a club like Bournemouth is elevating its level to be in some ways world class, right? This facility is state of the art in every way. And I think it's the first step in Bill Foley's vision to elevate the club to not only be in the Premier League consistently, but to compete in every way. And I think that starts, or I know that it starts with the environment that the players and staff are in. So the moment the players walk through the doors, they know that they have what they need around them to fulfill their potential. So it's been a wonderful few days. There's some snagging we still have to do around the building, but it's going to be a nice week for us.
Tim, you mentioned Bill Foley, who's the main owner. What can you tell us about Bill, what he's trying to do? And also, if you could just mention, I think there's some interesting names in the ownership group. Michael B. Jordan is one that I think our listeners, our readers will be aware of. How does the ownership group work?
Yeah, it really starts and ends with Bill Foley and his vision. He had great success as a businessman in the U.S., West Point grad, and he leads with humility, yet can combine that with his vision and his ambition for the club. So the way it works is Bill's really engaged, if not daily, certainly weekly. He's watching all of the matches. We have consistent phone calls and teams meetings and board meetings across our clubs where Bill is involved. There's actually another group called Kenai that Bill is the chairman of, and their president, Ryan Caswell, is also involved. So we are frequently getting on meetings where we are coordinating the strategic plan for not just Bournemouth, but across the group. And that's kind of how it works from an ownership perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you talk about across the group, teams also, Auckland FC in the A-League, Hibernian in the Scottish Premier League, Lorient in League R, and,
League 2, I'm afraid.
League 2 by fault.
They're on their way back, though.
Yeah, they're coming. But actually, if you do think about it, they're top of League 2. Yeah. And also, look at Hibernian, who are doing well in the SPL.
Yeah, they picked up.
Bournemouth. Conversations around Europe. I mean, is this where you guys saw it going? We talk about ambition. You've got various clubs in different territories now operating at their optimum.
Yeah. Look, the vision is to unite this family of clubs through performance and really achieve player optimization and shared learning. And that's a lot of words. That's sort of the words that are on the wall. But what it means is collaboration in every sense. And we want each club to be successful. Each club has autonomy and a different identity, and we want to respect their history and tradition, which I think differentiates us from some of the other multi-club ownership groups, right? We want to achieve the goals set out by the various owners of the groups, including Black Knight. And I think you're seeing that at a club like Hibernian with the Gordon family, Ian and Kit and Colin Gordon, who've owned the club. And then we came in, and we're trying to achieve a top 5 finish every year and maybe get into that third position like we're in right now, so that you're at the heels of Celtic and Rangers. And I think that's what's special about Black Knight is we can do that while also fulfilling our goals within the network of shared learning and moving players and and maybe achieving some synergies on the performance and medical side.
Tim, I accidentally promoted Lorient too early, but you know, last season there was a relegation, right? And we often talk to people, you know, new investors into European football, and we often say, you know, relegation. You know, have you got your heads around relegation? I mean, that's a sort of, from a business case point of view, that's pretty tough, isn't it? So, how did you deal with that, if you like, setback? You appear to have dealt with it quite well, but you know, how did the group take that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say, the actual relegation predated me coming on board, so I get to escape your question a little bit.
But I did question.
That's tiptoe here. No, what I did come on board to hear Loic Ferry and Bill and Ryan in the group discuss how we're going to get back to Liga. And I think that's really important, right? Because when you're relegated, and depending on the country, it's more difficult than others. But how are we shaping the roster and making sure that we don't sell players that are needed to get the club promoted right back up? You know, that bounce back is important. And I think the club has done a really good job in the selection of the coach, developing talent like Junior Krupi and Arthur and a number of other young players on Lorient's roster that are helping not only develop, but helping them be promoted back up to the first division. You know, it's obviously it's not finished yet. It's competitive at the top of Ligue 2, but we feel like we're in a good position.
Well, yeah, let's talk about Bournemouth. Obviously, you've waxed lyric about the new training ground. You know, state of the art. I've looked at it online. It looks absolutely fantastic. But you know, what are the challenges of owning a club the size of Bournemouth? You know, they're clearly performing brilliantly in the Premier League this season. But, you know, is there a ceiling to success with a club this size? And I think it's the size. I've been down to the stadium. It's a very small stadium in a particular part of the country. Are there thoughts about expansion? Are there thoughts about how great you can make this club?
Yeah. No, I think that's what we talk about every day is what we can do with this club and how far we can go. Certainly the training ground helps. The next stage is the stadium. You know, we've looked at building a new stadium or renovating the current one. Currently, we're planning on the latter. So I'm involved with a group of people here that are working with the city to get get the planning in place to help renovate Vitality. And the goal would be to expand capacity over 3 stages. The first one will take us to 16,000, then we'll get to 20, and then in the third phase, maybe even up to sort of 25,000 people. So that's really important, as we all know, to generate more revenue so that you can improve your roster. You know, at the end of the day, Bill's vision and the Black Knights' vision is to increase revenues that eventually will be put back into the squad. And because we're going to need it to compete. So obviously the TV broadcast revenue helps, but you need to get all levers going at a club in order to maintain your position in this very competitive league. And so that's the commercial side with sponsorships, that's increasing capacity at the stadium, and it also involves, you know, sales of players like Dominic Solanke. So it's going to happen, and that's modern football right there. Is how does a club in the English Premier League maintain its position despite being one of the smallest, if not the smallest, stadium in the league currently? And I think that's our challenge, is until we have that expanded stadium, how are we retaining our talent? How are we developing players in our academy with this brand new training ground? How are we leaning on Andoni and Thiago and the whole football operations staff to get us to where we want to go?
Tim, I remember when I spoke to Bill when he was on the way in, and I was absolutely intrigued by his story, particularly the Vegas Golden Knights story. I know we're going off into a bit of a tangent here, perhaps a little bit outside Black Knight football anyway. But for our listeners that don't know, Vegas Golden Knights, they're a ice hockey expansion team, ice hockey team in the desert, you know, Las Vegas, and were immediately successful. Right. So for UK listeners, that's unusual for an expansion team to be immediately successful. I know it happens a bit more in NHL than some of the other sports, but I don't want to get too technical here. But they have been successful, and they've continued to be successful. So I think that's really, really interesting. And then the other thing I think about that Vegas Golden Knights story, which I think does lead into what Bournemouth can do, and I believe are already doing, is the entertainment part of it. Bill is unashamedly an entertainer. He thinks, you know, football's in the entertainment business, and he wants to make going to a game fun. Is that happening? I haven't been this season, so is it fun to go to a Bournemouth game?
It's unbelievably fun, and having been fortunate to be a part of a multi-sport group in my previous club. Actually, both my clubs with the previous owner owned an NFL and an NBA team, and then the one in Toronto owned the Maple Leafs in the NHL and the NBA. So to be a part of a match day experience that goes beyond the 90 minutes is something that's really important in modern day sports and entertainment. And the Vegas Golden Knights do it better than anyone, in my opinion, in North America.
Tim, come on, tell our listeners a little bit about that. What do they do? Because it's wild, isn't it?
Well, it's just the moment that you walk through the doors, from the lights to the music. It's just at a whole new level. It's about going beyond what's happening on the ice, and to have the smells and the sounds be more than just a game. And it's hard because I think over here, having now experienced it the past 8 months, but followed it my entire life, it's about football. And you have to strike the right balance. So I think while we introduce new elements at Vitality, which our president of business operations, Jim Frivola, actually was at Vegas Golden Knights, and he's done a tremendous job of introducing new elements to the fan experience, but not going too far, and listening to the fans, the supporters, but also asking them to try something out. The video boards are an example, which I've noticed that some stadiums do not have video boards, and I think that elevates the experience. Why should the fans at home have a better experience than people in the venue? So they want to see a replay.
So Tim, it sounds like you're saying to me that Bournemouth will not be slaying the opponent's mascot before kickoff, which I believe they do in Vegas.
Yeah, I think there's I don't know that for a fact, so
I'm sure I've seen that on
but
YouTube.
It sounds exactly like something that they would do, and nothing wrong with that. I don't think we're ever going to get to the mascot race, which is common in baseball, where they're going to run around the bases with multiple mascots. But it is. If the fans want it, I think we would listen.
Yeah, Tim, you bring up a really good point, actually, in regarding the fans. And I know you've been down in the South Coast now for a while with your family. You're acclimatising quite nicely. What are you learning about that connection with Bournemouth fans and their club? And what are you looking to maximise within that space? Because, we talk about multi-club ownerships, but the connection with the ownership and the fans is also super important.
Number one, I've learned that it runs deep. The connection to the club runs deep, and it goes back generations. There's not a day that I walk through town where if I meet someone and I mention that I work with AFC Bournemouth, that they say, hey, I remember when they were in the bottom of the third or fourth tier, and I would go with my father and or my parents, and we would go to the match, and now look at them, they're flying, and I think that's what's so powerful and palpable about the English Premier League and English football pyramid generally. And it's what brought, I think, Bill and Black Knight to it is yes, it is about the stars on the pitch and acquiring the best talent, and because it's the top of the food chain globally. But at the end of the day, it's about the community. And what I always say is we are stewards of the club for a period of time. The clubs are for the fans, and they will always be for the community. And so you have to connect with them each match day. You have to listen to them. Sometimes you have to do things that don't please them, like moving players on, because that's the global game, and it is a global economy in that sense. But you can never forget where it started. You can never forget that.
Tim, it's interesting. You said that Bournemouth are top of the food chain, and Bill's always been quite honest about that, hasn't he? And because this whole series, we are going to talk about the pros and cons of multi-club ownership. And one of the more obvious cons, the more negatives, if you like, is those clubs who are further down the food chain. You'll have heard this. I don't want to be anyone's farm team. I'm not a feeder club. So how do you communicate that? And the one I know has been an issue is Lorient. And I imagine Hibs fans are looking at Bournemouth and going, well, look at our history, look at our fan base. Why are we somebody else's feeder club?
Yeah, we don't look at the clubs as feeder clubs. I think within the multi-club ownership groups, there are there are different groups that do consider their clubs feeder clubs. It doesn't mean that we're not looking for the players to move up the pyramid, and I think Bill has been clear about that. But we have to respect their own identity and what they're trying to achieve, and that's really important, especially right now at a club like Lorient, where they're trying to get promoted. We feel like certain players, the clubs have benefited from the moves, like Dango Utara, and then we've recently done Junior Krupi. But we've also allowed Junior Krupi to remain at Lorient so that they can achieve their goals. If he were to have gone to another club outside of our network, I don't know if he stays at Lorient. So I think that same goes for the transactions we plan to do at Hibs, is what's good and suitable for both clubs, what helps achieve their objectives. But ultimately, players want to realize their potential. They want to move up the ladder. So whether or not that's within Black Knight or not, we're never going to stand in a player's way as long as we can find a mutually beneficial situation. So we just feel like through the club network, we're achieving two things. You're controlling your supply, and there's cost and risk mitigation, right? And that's the hardest thing about acquiring players is you don't really truly know them. You can do as much scouting, as much recruiting. You can have as many interviews as you want, but until that player is in the locker room, out on the training pitch with the other players, you don't know how he's going to fit in with the group. But when you have within your own network, I can go to the training, I can go to the matches, I can sit in the locker room at one of the clubs and see how he interacts after a loss. And that really is what brings people together. It's not the wins and the championships. It's actually when you lose and who's there and who's around you. And that's what I think is the fabric that can bring a multi-club together beyond the single crest of one club.
Yeah, do not forget, on tomorrow's pod, we'll be answering your questions on multi-club ownership. Plenty of ways to get in touch. Comment below if you are watching on YouTube, or put your questions to Matt on X. Right, next, we'll continue our chat with Tim and Matt on how to run multiple football clubs all at once. Well, Tim, we're looking at multi-club structures and models in general. And, your structure holds various sports in its umbrella. We're just thinking, actually, in terms of how knowledge is shared between both spaces, whether we look at hockey or whether we look at football. Is that how this operation also works as well?
Yeah, there has to be mechanisms in which information is shared, and so for us, it's first and foremost it starts with scouting and recruitment because it's about the players and putting them into the best position as possible. So we have brought on board individuals to help with pooling the players, and so that we can satisfy the needs of all the clubs across the group, and to be a resource. That's at the end of the day, we're trying to be a resource and to help these clubs be better. And that starts with scouting recruitment. And then the other piece of that, the layer above that or with that, is the data and analytics side. So how are we working with third-party service providers or our own data to create more information on the player recruitment side? So, and then that leads to squad management, right? How are you sharing materials to communicate leading into a window? What are the needs of the club? We know that evolves daily as you lead into the window, and certainly during the window. And I think that's really important because very quickly a player could become available, and Hibs will want to go acquire that player, which could have a knock-on effect across their roster and certainly the plans within our group. Because if we're looking at, for example, a player at Bournemouth who maybe needs to be loaned, and we feel like Hibs is an opportunity to put that player into a good environment, well, then that could change as Hibs fills out its roster. One good example would be Alex Paulson, who's currently at Auckland, goalkeeper. The decision now is for us would it make sense to move him within the group, and Hibs could be a good location for him. So there's constant communication. There's weekly meetings. There's visits. Right in a couple of weeks, actually, Hibs coach David Gray is going to come down and take in a session down at Bournemouth. And I think that's important to have it consistent, uniform. You need to have consistent values across the group. Everybody needs to know what the needs are of each other's clubs so that the sporting directors can speak. It's not just myself and my colleagues who are doing the communication. We want the sporting directors talking to each other daily so that there's that trust that builds across the group. So you got the scouting and recruitment, data and analytics, the squad management piece, coaching analysis, our head of performances are speaking frequently, and those things all come together. I would say on a weekly basis to formulate the interworkings of Black Knight.
So you wouldn't have hockey, for instance, having conversations with football or soccer, for instance, two different sports, but any intel shared at all?
We haven't done that as much as across our football teams. Now, I would say our communications and commercial sides have synergies across Vegas Golden Knights. So when you talk about someone like Jim Favola and myself, we are talking with Tosi, who runs communications for Vegas Golden Knights, and he is regularly in contact with us in terms of shaping our narrative. How are we connecting with the community? How are we improving our match day experience for fans? So I would say on the commercial side, in the past, I have in my experience at a previous multi-sport group, I have looked at performance across hockey and football. It's just challenging because the schedules don't line up to get people and talking all regularly, and I think that's the challenge with us is sometimes the schedules and the time zones just don't always match up and align.
I thought it was very interesting that you said earlier that you'd never stand in the way of a player that wants to sort of move on, and that makes sense. You've created a little walled garden. Ideally, they would stay within the group, but if Dominic Solanke comes along and wants to move on, and you're gonna bank the transfer fee, all good. I would be failing in my job if I did not ask you if the same thing applies to coaches and managers.
Oh, yes, good question, Matt.
I don't want to stand in for Bill on this, but I think he said from the very beginning that he wants people to choose to want to be here, and I think that stands for players and coaches. And so if you are going to be sitting with Andoni over the next few months, you're going to talk about what are his goals and ambitions. And what I know is that I think that they will match with Black Knights and with Bournemouth. I really do, because I think there's no ceiling to Bill's ambition for this club. And so, we hope and plan for it to match with Andoni's. But, he's a really good human being, our leader. And I think that's you would like to say that that's the norm within the business, but unfortunately it's not. And he's a great person to work for, and it obviously has to align. It can't be something where Bournemouth doesn't get what it needs out of the transaction. But when you're talking with individuals like the head coach or all of the players, you want to find alignment.
That just leads me nicely into my last question. I don't know if I have got another one, but. Yeah. Where do you see Black Knight in 5 years' time? And I mean like you, I mean Bill. Where's the group? What does success look like?
Yeah, I think we're in sort of phase one. We're assessing and we're in creation mode where we're coming up with 3 to 5 year strategy. So we're in growth mode. So I think we're still looking at potentially acquiring another club. We did a strategic partnership with Kyoto Sanga and the J League in Japan. We're talking with MLS teams about a potential strategic partnership there. So in 5 years, I think that we have grown in size. I think we've made the ties between the clubs stronger. I think we'd increase the number of transactions between the clubs. I think especially in the recruitment side, when you look at the youth, players across the world want to play in Europe. When you're looking at my experience down in South America, where they maybe would come to the US but ultimately they do want to be in the Premier League. So you want to see the ties within the pathway from our club to Hibs to Lorient, from Bournemouth to those clubs all the way down and around the world to be stronger. So I think in 5 years, if we're speaking, I would like to see the number of players that have moved increase. Obviously the growth, and then we'd love to play in Europe, and certainly each of our clubs or a couple of our clubs are in positions now where they're in the mix, but we're in sport for a reason. We want trophies. Who doesn't? It's some of the best experience I've had in my career is lifting trophies with people that you work with and that you care about, and I don't think it should be any different for our clubs.
Yeah, honestly, lovely way to end it. Tim Bezbatchenko, president of Black Knight Football. Thank you so much for joining us on the Athletic F.E. podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, let's switch our focus to another big MCO, L.A.F.C. The L.A.F.C group has invested in teams in Switzerland and Austria, and they've got a joint venture with Bayern Munich called Red and Gold, which owns academies in Africa and also in Uruguay. Here's Matt in conversation with L.A.F.C's co-managing owner, Larry Berg.
Larry, thanks so much for joining us. This is Larry Berg. Let's start off by introducing yourself, Larry. Tell me a little bit about who you are and how you got into soccer.
Sure. I started playing at 8 years old in 1974, which was not typical always at that time, and I remained a super fan since. Somewhere along the line, after being in a private equity career, I invested in AS Roma, and then I invested in Swansea. But in both cases, I was pretty much a minority passive investor. And then L.A.F.C came along, Los Angeles Football Club in the MLS, and myself and a few partners bought into that club, which is in my hometown of Los Angeles. So that's been a lot of fun. So now I'm all soccer all the time.
I was going to ask that, but has it always been soccer for you? Or are you interested in other sports as well?
Always. I've been a Philadelphia Eagles fan, which is a good year to be an Eagles fan. We won the Super Bowl, but I've always been a soccer fanatic. And it used to be in the old days, it was not always easy to find elite soccer. We didn't always have a domestic league. I was able to find European clubs once in a while. But today it's so easy to watch worldwide soccer. It's changed dramatically. And in the U.S., it's particularly changed when FIFA, the video game, came out. And all the kids would play the video game and learn about the worldwide players. And so now it's not quite as much of a lonely experience being a soccer fanatic. It's been great to watch.
Well, good. Welcome to the rest of the world, Larry.
Thank you.
Tell me then a little bit about, you've already mentioned some of the teams that you've previously been involved with. You're now an investor in L.A.F.C, which we know about, great team in the MLS. Tell me about the rest of the group, because I think your group, as opposed to some of the other ones we've talked about, is really fascinating. There's something quite unique about it.
Yeah. So it all started, we got together with Bayern Munich pretty much two and a half years ago, and they were interested in doing a network. We had always thought about a network, but we didn't know that we could handle that, in part because L.A.F.C was still early in its maturation. But with Bayern's help and added value, we felt like this would be a really interesting way to go about it, where Bayern sort of checks the box for an elite European club, and of course all the things that brings with players and scouting and expertise, etc. And we were perceived by them as being an elite MLS North American club. So without any cross ownership whatsoever, we kind of start with what we like to say is, 2 rungs in the ladder. And then the goal would be to add other rungs so that a player, you could both discover a player and help develop a player at very young ages around the world, but then move them along and try to get them first team minutes at the highest level they can handle, whatever that may be. If that's Bayern Munich, that's fantastic. If that's L.A.F.C, that's great. So the first club we got involved with was Racing Montevideo, which is in Uruguay. L.A.F.C had been very active in Uruguay. Actually had more of a brand in Uruguay than Bayern Munich did, believe it or not, just because we had been there on the ground. Mm-hmm. We had acquired a number of players from Uruguay. We spent a lot of time there. And they also had really good youth development. So we looked for good youth development. We looked for, obviously, countries that were stable and secure and in great soccer nations. Uruguay is an unbelievable, punch above your weight soccer nation. And so it started there. Then we added a academy in Gambia called Gambino Stars. And that covered Africa. You can never really cover Africa, but that was a foothold in Africa, which is now expanded from Gambia to Senegal and Cameroon. And the talent there is unbelievable. The development that they brought us was very exciting. And frankly, it's a little less, it's a little more untapped, right? So a more opportunity to find perhaps diamonds in the rough. So I would say both those places were opportunities to find talent young. In the case of Racing, they also have an incredible club. They've made Copa Sudamericana last 2 years. So that club's about winning trophies. Africa's more about developing players. And then we, meaning L.A.F.C, but not Bayern Munich, went and bought Grasshopper, First Division, Switzerland. And then we opportunistically acquired Innsbruck, FC Wacker, which was in Fourth Division, Austria. And but for a variety of rules reasons, Bayern can't co-own them, but they can still help us with loans of players and that sort of thing. And so we picked those countries in particular, partly because of, partly due to buy-in price. Our goal was to invest in players, not necessarily overdo it on the clubs. And then if you look at the ability to make a European tournament, you had to be in a situation where you weren't dominated by giants that you'd never be able to keep up with. If you look at the number of foreign players they allow, you wanted to be in a situation where we could have player flows that made sense and not be too restrictive. So a variety of things came together to turn that into the network. And then in the future, we would hope to perhaps add Asia, maybe some other clubs. But right now we have enough to handle, and we're just trying to make what we have today work.
And Larry, just to be clear, because I speak to people like you, people who are either already investing in clubs or want to invest in clubs, and I often sort of say, do you see a genuine return on investment here? Or is this just fun? Or is it both? I mean, there's lots of things you can invest your money in.
Yeah.
Right? But you have chosen, because you clearly love soccer, to get involved in soccer.
Yeah.
So is this a bit of fun as well?
We get asked this all the time. And I would say both. But it's funny, if you ask me, I would say clearly it was a lot about the fun. And nobody wants to lose money, but a lot about the fun. If you ask my partner, he would say it's about the investment, because he doesn't want it to seem like a vanity project. So it's funny how the two people making the same investments can look at it a different way. I would say AS Roma turned out not to be a good investment, and nor has Swansea. So we've learned the hard way that investing in European football is not for the faint of heart. L.A.F.C, it appears to look like a very good investment if you look at the third-party valuations. Obviously, the entire structure of North American MLS is different. We don't have promotion relegation. Los Angeles is an incredible city. It's one of the reasons I think Bayern Munich chose us. The fact that you'd be in Los Angeles in North America is a big positive. Being in Munich in Germany is a big positive. So I would say it's some of both, but I don't think you can do this unless you're passionate. And I think you have to look at it as a long-term investment. So if you had a certain amount of money and you were looking to maximize returns, you'd probably do something else. But that doesn't mean you can't do well.
No, well, something else is boring, right? Well, you're having fun, clearly, I can tell. But you're not thinking about dividends, are you? Dividends are a dirty word in certainly in European soccer. Your return on investment is on the way out, isn't it?
So it's a long-term investment, and I think we should separate L.A.F.C. and prior to that Roma and Swansea from the network. So L.A.F.C. is something I'd like to own the rest of my life. Certainly no dividends, certainly in some cases capital calls, team appreciation in the community, fantastic. The network is designed, I'm not local. I don't live in Montevideo, I don't live in Gambia, I don't live in Zurich, I don't live in Innsbruck, I don't live in Munich. So by definition, it's a little bit more on the investment side. It is also fun, but it is a lot of extra work, and it's a real tax on my management team. So we do that because we think we can make L.A.F.C better. I think when you're in the middle of player flows in different continents, I think that makes you a better scouting department. It makes you a better recruiter. I think it puts you in the middle of more things, and therefore I do think it will pay off for L.A.F.C on a player basis to be better. Win trophies, coming back to winning trophies. But this one is more about, hopefully at some point sooner rather than later, not the rest of my lifetime, it will pay dividends. Now those dividends will be reinvested. They'll be reinvested in players, and you'll continually try to move up in terms of what you can do and how many players you can touch, etc. But if LAFC never pays a dividend for the next 30 years, as long as we're not losing too much money, that would certainly be okay, as long as we're creating value and helping the community, etc. In order for a network to work, you do have to have the flywheel, and the flywheel does include money. Otherwise, you can't expand and touch more players and train more players.
Well, one of the reasons I was really keen to speak to you, because I am really intrigued by this network concept, which I'm hearing more and more, but equally your focus on academies, particularly in hotbeds, talent hotbeds. Other people have tried it. I think they found it hard, frankly. How's that going? If we just focus on Gambinos in Gambia, how is that going, and how do you sort of see that developing over the next, 2-3 years?
It's definitely hard. It's hard geographically. It's hard to get there. It's hard culturally. It's hard when the players move, and sometimes it takes them longer to get oriented. Probably would not have done it without a partner like Bayern Munich. to take on, part of the load. But I would say that we like to say the size of the prize in the investment world. The size of the prize is very high. The development costs in Gambia are much, much lower than the development costs in the U.S. So the U.S. has a challenge of cost just because we are a high cost country. And so if you're able to pull it off in South America, if you're able to pull it off in Africa, it is cheaper. It is a hotbed of talent. I can't say if it's more or less than the U.S. yet. I don't really know, but it is a hotbed of talent. And from what I've seen so far with the Gambinos in particular, and they have gone on to not only be loaned and sold throughout Europe, but they've trained at Bayern Munich. And I'm talking the kids, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. Clearly the upside on that talent is very significant. And there is definitely proof of concept of West African players in particular being successful at the highest levels in Europe and frankly garnering big transfer fees. So we're not necessarily thinking we're going to be in the big transfer fee game. Maybe we'll be in the high volume, low transfer fee game, but there is proof of concept there. So I think it is harder, but I also think the upside's greater.
I think you sort of answered it really nicely in your previous answer where I asked you about dividends, and you made it pretty clear that LAFC is the one in your heart. That's the one you're going to hold on to, and you're not Swiss, you're not Austrian. Do you ever worry about how you position yourself with the fans of those clubs? Do you ever sort of have to be careful?
Yes. How
you speak? I mean, are you seem very relaxed now, but are you being guarded now about, I can't offend fans of Grasshopper? Grasshopper are a historic club. I think they're the most successful club in Swiss football history, or certainly up there.
Yeah.
Does that worry you?
I don't know if I'd call it being careful. I think you have to appreciate the culture and understand that, LAFC for me locally, where I share it with my children and everything else, that's Grasshopper for them or Innsbruck for them. And what we'd like to think that we are bringing, which is why I started with trophies. We'd like to think we are going to make them better. So the Grasshopper in the 1990s was a truly elite club. And we would like to get them back to that level. We are able to do it with money for sure. But the ability to bring players and punch above your weight, I think is the key to, you need a competitive advantage in this world. Speaking as an investment person, you need a competitive advantage. What's our competitive advantage in Grasshopper? Number one, we think some of the things we've done at LAFC will translate commercially to Grasshopper. But it starts with being good on the field. And it starts with, for example, at LAFC, one of the keys for us was really activating our supporter groups. We were activating our supporter groups before we had a player, before we had a stadium, before we had a sponsor. We would go into the community and we would get that local support. And Grasshopper has fantastic local support. And that was very important to us. I think they knew that was very important to us. Then you have to bring players. And when I say punch above your weight, hopefully I can get better players than maybe I can afford on my own because I'm getting them from other places that we have an ownership stake. Maybe it's from Bayern Munich with somebody who's not quite ready for first team level. Maybe it's from South America. Maybe it's from Africa. And they haven't seen the Africa quality yet. They're going to be thrilled once they see it. And then if you can improve them on the field, and it's kind of that flywheel I talk about, then you'll fill the stands. If you fill the stands, you'll get the sponsors. If you get the sponsors, you'll get the money. If you get the money, you get even better players. Then you get into the European tournaments, and then you're back to the 1990s. So I hope they appreciate the fact that we're not at cross purposes. For me to be successful, I need them to be successful locally. I need them to win trophies. It doesn't make a lot of sense otherwise. And so making European tournaments is one of the legs of the stool to make the investment pay off, which means you have to be in the top few in that league. Well, to get to the top few in that league, you got to do a number of things right. And so partly it's money, partly it's focus, management talent, players, youth development, etc. And we think that we're aligned.
As a last question, Larry, this podcast series is about groups of clubs, multi-club groups. But it would be remiss of me if I didn't ask you about your ownership group at LAFC, because there's some fascinating people in there. Magic Johnson, am I right in thinking? Mia Hamm, Will Ferrell. What do they bring to this network? What do they make of it?
So it's all part of our what I call our big tent philosophy, which we're trying to bring to the other clubs, which is we want a big tent, everyone's included, and that includes our ownership group. So we don't have one person like me who controls everything. We have a number of people, and we have a big ownership group, and everyone brings something different. In Magic's case, we like to joke that he's like the secret mayor of Los Angeles. Like, Magic is unbelievable in Los Angeles. He cares about Los Angeles. He cares about the people that help build our stadium. He cares about the people that work in our stadium. So he didn't come at this as a soccer or football aficionado. He came at this as someone who was deeply, deeply caring about Los Angeles and frankly very well known. And it showed a bit of a statement of intent. And so in a world where you're trying to activate the supporters, and in the early days before you have a team, you're trying to say that we're an ambitious club, obviously doing a network as part of being ambitious. We're an ambitious club. We want to win trophies. Here's what our ownership group looks like. Mia Hamm is the top women's footballer in history, also local, and very, very helpful. Her expertise is pretty incredible. And it was a bit of a statement of intent about inclusivity. We're a very inclusive club. If you look at our supporters group, which is, we call it the 3252, it's incredibly diverse. And then Will Ferrell, who is really a treasure. And Will was a friend of mine who I knew in LA. And over the years, I said it can be a lonely experience in the old days being a soccer fanatic in America if you're my demographic. And Will was one of those guys that I would always talk about the U.S. men's national team, and I would talk soccer. And I knew that he had very similar age, very similar passion. And when I called him about this, he was in immediately. And that might have been the best decision I ever made, because he's incredible. He shows up. His family is, his wife's from Sweden. He played soccer in high school. His kids played. And so he goes to away games. He cares about the team. He adds value wherever he can. And we don't have a sponsor or a fan that would not like to spend time with Will Ferrell. And he makes time. So it's all part of everybody doing whatever they can to be helpful. It makes for we often get asked, how do you keep an ownership group of that size all aligned and moving in the same direction and all getting along? Maybe we just got lucky, but the alchemy of it all coming together has been incredible. And all three of them have added a ton of value to what we're trying to do.
Oh, sounds like a really happy bunch, Larry. Look, lovely talking to you. And thanks very much for taking the time, because I know it's early for you.
Of course. Nice meeting you. Take care.
Yeah, that was Matt's chat with Larry Berg. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Larry, and also Tim for your contributions on today's show. Tomorrow, we'll wrap up this series by answering your questions on multi-club models. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Do not forget to also leave us a comment as well. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search the Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.